Well, I guess we're going to go ahead and just jump in. Thank you for joining us during this time. We're excited just to share some of our experiences, but we also realize we're sitting here speaking before a bunch of very educated, experienced worship pastors, or whatever your role is. So we'll look forward to kind of hearing and getting feedback from your experiences as well, from your side of this topic. Because we come from the perspective of the actual musician. Like we're the difficult classical ones to deal with that y'all have to bear and learn how to do something with whenever you have a Sunday morning. So I'm curious, how many of y'all have blended services or two separate services? Well, I guess that's multiple questions. Blended services? Okay. Two separate, like contemporary and modern, or that's the same thing. Okay. And 300, 400, like over 400 people in your church? Okay, good, decent size. How many of y'all actually use string players in your worship services? Okay. How many want to use string players? And how many have used them and have failed? We've been part of those plenty of failings. So like Galen said, we really want to hear from y'all as well, because we can benefit from things that y'all have learned over the years of experience. But we thought before we kind of go into some things that we wanted to share, we thought we would just kind of back up a little bit and talk about who we are and kind of our journey from kids till now. We started in music around, you were 4 and I was 6. And it was just your basic piano lessons. And then violin was added to that about 2 years later, and it was straight up classical. And so I would say for the first huge chunk of our life, that's basically all we did. And we would play in a lot of nursing homes though. We did have teachers that were Christians, and so they would actually give us a couple of hymns every now and then and have us play together, but always in a classical style. But then at a good point we started playing together, and then just in short, our mom had a passion for the elderly. Our dad worked at a leprosy hospital, only one of 2 in the United States. And so that's where we grew up, just like learning to play together and being encouraged that it's never too young to be a part, to lead in worship, but also to be a part of worship. And I think that's maybe where our mindset began to take place of what is true worship. Age has no part in that, but practically, what does that look like? So we joined, music kept going. You ended up switching over to the cello. And at this point, we were studying with the LSU professors. We were not enrolled, but we were just taking with them. And doing the Louisiana Youth Orchestra at the same time. And so our life was heavy classical. We would do string camps in the summer, and competitions, and just drilling the concertos, the etudes, the Bach solos and suites. And at the same time, granted, we would still play for churches, because from nursing homes, it kind of became a domino effect where someone would be at a nursing home visiting their parent, and then they would invite us to a book club of theirs, and then it just kind of kept going, where word of mouth would have us playing pretty much locally though, while we were still in high school. And we would do different gigs with symphony players for Christmas cantatas, and of course Christmas cantatas are very much of a classical. You generally have everything notated out, but that was a fun experience to be able to play with them. And then we started meeting different people in the church industry as we continued to play for different church events. People like Benji Harlan, does anyone know? Yeah, you meet him, you never forget him. And he came into our life and started actually writing certain music for us. and having us come play at different churches with him. And you know, he'd kind of throw us into scenarios where he'd be like, all right, let's do this hymn and these keys, and I'll play the piano, and he'd just kind of tell us what to do, which would put a little pressure on us. We're like, ooh, here we go. Because, you know, being classically trained, you get very attached to that music, and it's just like, I need my notes in front of me. So experiences like that started branching us out. And then Joshua Spack, is that a familiar name to anyone? He's done a lot with word publishing. We met him along the way, and so now we're kind of living double lives is what it felt like. We have our LSU life where we're doing all of our classical stuff, and then our string camps, and then we have our church life where it's, you know, Benji Harlan and Joshua Spack throwing us into awkward scenarios with no music. And so it was very formidable years, and it was stretching us a lot. And Joshua even tried to take us and kind of change the way we even sang, because singing is the newer thing that we've added in the last several years. We grew up singing together, but that was very classical too. We did different choir camps, and you know, as y'all all know, choir singing is a different animal than solo contemporary singing. So Joshua took us and he tried to really reform the way we were singing, which was awkward, and I think he really struggled. And we listened back on some of those recordings, and it's like, wait, they're not British. Yeah, very much so. And so then, fast forward a few years, and it came down to the college decision. I graduated a little bit late. We were home educated, and you graduated early. Our older sister had waited and done some other educational things, and so it looked like we were going to all go to college at the same time for classical performance degrees, each in our individual instruments. But when it came down to that point, like Katie said, we were kind of torn, because at this point our heart was becoming lyrics, church music, and even though we appreciated the classical and it's invaluable for training and we still love the music, it was kind of, our hearts were kind of starting to veer away from that being our biggest drive. And so it came down to the day of decision that we had to let the university know something. Wheaton, the conservatory, is where we were probably headed. And when it came down to it, we were just like, no, I don't think this is really our heart anymore. And then at that time, we were starting to travel more and do more in churches. And we were just starting to realize that's where our love and passion is. So we said no to college. It was a very hard decision, because for you educators out there, we could have learned a ton. And so we had to just kind of glean that along the way and pick that up from other sources. But we skipped college at the time, continued studying, taking lessons and stuff, but just hit the road. And that's, I guess, what we've been doing ever since. So 6 years since then. And it was that one summer after we said no to college where you realize, okay, we said no to many positive things, a lot of theory education and a collaboration. You know, we collaborate as sisters, but it's really different. There's like a radio wave that you don't actually have to try as hard to stay together, because it kind of just happens. And then when you play with other people, it's like, oh, I actually need to count. So that summer, we went to Nashville for a summer camp that was theory focused. It was the Ben Spears Stamps Baxter School of Music. And very Southern gospel, but we had a blast. And we met people there who, the Lord just started to open different doors in the Christian music world in Nashville. And so then at that point, we kind of realized after a few trial and errors that our style did not fit in Southern gospel, and but that we still appreciated that genre, and the people in that genre really helped us along and introduced us to the right people that were more in the genre that we fit in. And so it was at that point we bought a home in Nashville and have kind of gone back and forth ever since. But all this to say, it's kind of like not everyone's story is kind of like this blend of as well as the classical side. Most people will either stick in either or, one generally just all classical, or if you're fiddle, or like Celtic fiddle. A lot of times they just don't, or I haven't seen as much that they cross over. And it's kind of funny because a lot of the times what the Christian music world in Nashville likes about some of our playing, the classical world tries to work out of us as far as interpretation. So it's been very interesting to see the difference in the two and how they like different things. Because once we moved to Nashville, we started doing a good amount of session work for artists there, and that was always fun because you have such an array of genres, but all, especially in the Christian music world, all for the same purpose. So that was really fun for us. But yeah, like Katie said, some of the techniques and stuff that the classical world always been on us to try and get out of us. As soon as we moved to Nashville, they're like, "We love how you do this." And we're like, "Which one is it?" The conflict. I think that's where we started to realize it's two different worlds. It's two different worlds, and learning how to blend those by keeping good technique and improving, but also realizing that stylistically there's a lot more freedom and more of the blended or modern way of doing things too. Yeah. So I guess we want to jump now into a couple of we have 5 different points of experience that we've learned over the years. But as we think about them, realizing that they all come under the framework or kind of the funnel and plumb line of 3 questions about what is worship accompaniment, and is it helpful as we think about everything involved in worship. And when we do art, and like we said, we're coming from a bit of a different angle since we're not full-time worship leaders like y'all, but we lead worship in more of a concert type setting. But as we think of how we handle things too, is it beneficial? Is it helpful? And will my people be able to worship with this? As we think about, should cello be added to this song? Should violin be added to this piece or this part of this verse? And in a church setting, it's should this musician that we have that would love to be a part? I know sometimes those situations, I think we'll talk more about this, can get sticky too, of kind of this person really wants to be a part of the worship service. They may be good, they may not be good. All those situations, at least for us, and answering a lot of those, have been very helpful to put under those 3 questions of, is it helpful, is it beneficial, and will it help people to worship? And are we actually blending styles, or are we creating a new genre? Because I know I've gotten stuck in my mind a lot of the times the word blend, where you think you're combining all these different genres to make, a service that pleases everyone, or are we actually creating a new genre solely for the purpose of glorifying God and leading people in worship? So it's kind of a new frame of mind that I've been thinking about recently and how to approach it, and how everything you're added is it benefiting the worship and the sound and the lyric of the song? Because when we think about the blended style, there's almost a compromise that goes into that. It's kind of okay, we'll take some of the parts of this, some of the we'll kind of compromise and meet in the middle. But as Katie was saying, I think it's better to view it as this is a new genre, and let's see what we can come up with the best new genre for your church, for your congregation, and for your people that you can. And it actually makes it way more creative and a fun process rather than a compromised process. So some of these things, many of you, it'll probably be oh yeah, common sense. We do that all the time with our string players anyway. But we thought we would just at least touch on them just in case. And then we want to open up the floor and see if there are any things y'all have done that we've missed. Because I want everyone to be able to leave here taking a little nugget, helpful nugget home. And so if we've missed something that you want to say, that would offer some help to someone else, then absolutely raise your hand, speak up, interrupt us. But the first point is, what do you do when you have a string player in particular, but really any instrumentalist, I guess, but you don't have music and you want to add or join them? And I know for many, does anyone here use Camp Kirkland's arrangements a lot of the times? And yeah. So there are things out there like that, but not all the time. Not for every song is that available, especially more like the modern worship. And so I think that the modern worship hymns or songs, that's where it gets a little bit more tricky, because you don't have resources like Camp Kirkland stuff. And whenever in the past we were thrown into these contemporary services where, it would be kind of funny for us, because you literally had like the dim lights, the spot machines going, and here we are in like fancy dresses feeling so out of place, but like, okay, what do we do with ourselves? And a lot of the times the worship pastor would just give us chord chart or a lead sheet, and we'd have to figure out, okay, how do we handle this? And a lot of the times we would just take the triad and hands down, always her on, if it's a bass instrument, we would hands down stick her on the bass, the tonic, no matter what the rest of us were doing. And I think that goes for pretty much all bass instruments, that, maybe it's a little bit different with brass. That's definitely, I'll say that's the safest route. Like, you can't go wrong with that. It always sounds good. Now, creatively, if you do have a musician who kind of knows the theory of things, knows what sounds good and doesn't, the creative side, leaving the tone, works really well, and it's very nice, especially for cello, for all instruments. But what's safe, if you have a little bit more of an inexperienced musician, a young musician, a musician who has only used music before, is not used to going by a chord chart, putting them on root, can't go wrong with that. Yeah. And what I missed saying earlier is that we have a third sister, and she used to travel and play with us, actually. So it used to be the string trio. And so at that point, the triad, each had a note. So I would take the third, and she'd take the fifth, or vice versa. We'd sometimes switch it up. And that would generally work for us. And, you sit on some verses, you play on some other verses to keep it kind of creative. And we just kind of had to, maybe the cello play one verse on your own, and then maybe the viola played a verse on her own, to where it's not all three instruments, every single verse, all at the same time. But then also sticking an instrument on the melody, I find that's if it's a lead instrument, if it's an obligato instrument, and maybe there's not an obligato part written out or notated, or it's not a song that Camp Kirkland is already notated, or someone else like that, just sticking them on the melody is always a safe option. And safe in the sense that it's not also going to distract from the melody, because it is the melody. Because as we think, again, funneling all these things through, is it going to be helpful, is it going to be beneficial, or is it going to encourage people to sing with all their voice? Or will it be, sometimes an obligato is not even always enhancing to particular verses, so maybe you just want that melody. And then also someone's level of playing, like maybe they can't sight read Camp's obligatos or violin lines, because they can actually get a little tricky sometimes. I myself will look at that and I'm like, I'm scared. So I think and there's a couple of websites that I guess y'all already know most of these. Praisecharts.com, worship.lifeway.com, and I also find hymnary.com for your more classic hymns. All of those can be amazing sites to find all these songs in different keys and the lead sheets and the chords, and to be able to work with those at that point. As far as and going back to the melody with an obligato instrument, because when you don't have the actual measure count, because that's what's also scary for some classical musicians, is I want to see the exact measure and how many measures I'm supposed to rest and when I'm supposed to come in to the beat. And that's not always possible. So it's more coaching them through, as well as saying, okay, just you have a good ear, you know when that melody is going to start, and just play the melody with the singing, and it's a safe option. So I guess that takes us into the second category that we want to discuss, and that is the beginner, or someone who plays for fun or as a hobby, or they used to play, in their high school days or college days, and what to do with them. Because as a church too, you want to encourage the body of Christ, and you want to, especially the young musician who's striving to worship the Lord with the gifts, and give them opportunity to do that.
Because I look back on our story, and I bless the heart of some of these music ministers who had so much faith in us. I remember the first gig that we ever showed, it was our first paid gig at a church, Christmas cantata, and I think back on what I was wearing, and it's like that poor worship pastor, it's like, I don't even know why he gave me a chance. It's like this hot pink dress with hearts all over it. But if it weren't for them, I just think back on all of those people, the encouragement that they gave, while still striving for excellence though, because they didn't come down to our level. They made us strive to meet the level of excellence that they had in their church. And that is what we should strive for in church music. Is, I like the saying, it's not about professionalism, it's about excellence. So excellence is doing something to the best of our ability, no matter what level that is. Professionalism means you're doing it to a level where there's no mistakes, and if there are, it's at the expense of someone's job or something. In church music, we are called to excellence, and so looking back on those worship pastors, I see the beautiful mix that they had of encouraging us as young, striving, not the best musicians, but not compromising on the level that they were going to keep their worship at. As she was saying, it's so important to have that, outreach mindset to those involved in your church, but how do you balance that would be the big question.
And how do you balance it still within those? Is it helpful? Is it beneficial? And will it distract, or will it encourage people to worship? And, we've also taught music, so I guess we taught for maybe 10 years. And so I guess with that little experience of dealing with young ones, and how do you encourage them? Because most of our students were all Christians, and so they also wanted to play church music. And so how do you incorporate that for them when they don't know all the notes yet? And I guess one thing that could be explained to them is what we addressed just a few minutes ago about the chords and the triads. And if you see a C major chord right here, just play C. If you see a G major chord, just play G. And notate, maybe even it takes a little extra time on your part to notate it out for them, because that can be a complex topic depending on what level they are. And if you want them to play the third of the triad, maybe it'll just take a few extra minutes of your job to notate that out for them so that they know what notes they're supposed to be playing. Or perhaps even researching those instruments, because I just think that if I was a worship pastor, I literally don't know anything about trumpet. I just know it's a very weird key that they follow, or it looks like a C and they're not playing a C. And so taking time to research those instruments in that particular person. All right, if you're in Suzuki Book 2, how many notes do you know by Suzuki Book 2? And looking through and then realizing, okay, they can play this song, and I'll write out the melody, or I'll write out these chords for them. Also realizing, though, there's as much as I think it's so vital to include these people in your church, and these musicians, there's a hard truth aspect too of, once again, going back to those 3 questions, if you funnel everything through that,
there have been moments where you have to say no, and in a sense, that should encourage the musician as well. Having just one of those hard conversations of, I know you want to be a part, in thinking as a picture as the whole. Here's what we need for worship. I'm not sure right now this instrument or where we are will benefit the worship of the body of Christ. Continue working, and in the future we'll see what we can do. It's a hard, very hard truth moment, but we have instances of that. And as an aspiring musician, it should only encourage you to, okay, I'm going to go work harder and come back and try, I want to be a part one day. So, and I think that's kind of like our third point, and it's kind of a rabbit trail point because it doesn't really touch on classical in a worship setting. It's just more of like worship in general. But it comes from experience because, you know, as beginner instrumentalists at that season when we were at, it doesn't always sound good. But we have a tip later on that can come with the engineering side of things. You can get away with a lot in that. So from y'all's perspective, have we said anything that you think, oh, I can add to that? Or, oh, I had a beginner last year and this is what I did with her that was very helpful, that we're maybe missing out? Oh, you do, yes. Absolutely, a resource. Yes, CCLI. Oh, that's awesome. Songselect.com. Okay, awesome. Okay, so he says another resource is songselect.com, which is associated with CCLI, and it has modern songs and worship and hymns, kind of all there, right? In different keys. Another resource, hymn charts, yes. That's a good one. No, thank y'all for those. Because I feel like anytime we were asked to do like a modern service or something, you kind of emergency start Googling for these songs and the different keys. And yes, I recognize that one does pop up as well. So thank you. All right. Yeah, so again, kind of like Galen was saying, some of the things that, you know, as you think about what to add in a worship service and will this be beneficial, you know, if you don't have an arrangement or you don't have a fit for that instrument, and if you don't think the song fits that instrument, it's one of those things where you just talk to that church member in a very gracious and loving way, and you basically, it kind of takes, I would feel like it would take the pressure off of you in many ways to put it back on the worship and on God, saying, okay, is it going to be beneficial for the church? Is it going to be helpful for everyone singing to, you know, add trumpet on "'Tis So Sweet," you know, or just different things like that. And I was actually talking to a girl this past week. I was actually talking to her about this topic. And she was talking how a violinist was recently added to their worship set and how sweet it was for certain songs. But then as she was talking, she was like, yeah, you're right. It's not added on every song or every verse and not every Sunday, to where then it keeps it fresh. And I heard it, she said that word fresh, and I was like, that's actually a really great word. Because if you do the same things Sunday after Sunday, you know, you kind of get used to it, versus if you alternate instruments or choose the instruments that match the repertoire of that Sunday's song choices, it keeps things fresh, and it keeps the worship from feeling old, and it enhances the songs from week to week. And also, I think a determining factor for that can be what stylistically too, because even technical things as in the cello in a lot of contemporary music, because its frequencies really interact with the same frequencies as the bass, it so easily gets lost in contemporary music, especially if it's just playing on that tonic bass note as well. A lot of times, especially if you don't mic it correctly, it's pretty pointless to even be there. That's why a lot of times, even more, because I've been listening to this a lot more recently, in contemporary music, a lot of times they actually have the cello playing higher, because that's the only way, kind of going above the frequencies of the other instruments, because that's the only way it's actually going to shine forth and have some kind of spotlight. So a lot of those times, because I know Keith and Kristen Getty, that's the reason they don't even use cello in their music, is because it would just interfere and there's really no place for it frequency-wise. So that can kind of be a determining factor of, also, is my, if we're going with cello specifically, is my cellist at an advanced level enough to not just be able to play the tonic note? If so, and your music is more in that contemporary style, it's just going to get lost. That's usually where maybe a violin or more like a fiddle type can come in, because that level can kind of go above the frequencies of the other and actually enhance and have a spotlight there. So that's more of a practical tip, and especially, like I said, in contemporary music, your cellist should, if you have a cellist, should and would need to be able to play in a little bit higher register.
Which brings us to our fourth point, which is the sound amplification of, in particular, stringed instruments, because that's just what we're used to. Kind of like she mentioned, a lot of times when we go to different churches, they don't properly mic the cello. So our parents travel with us, and our dad runs our sound, and we love that because, you know, we've all worked together and we've worked on the sound of the cello and how do we mic it to the best of its ability and get those frequencies in that sub, you know, just ringing. Because a lot of people leave it in a treble register, and so there's all those different details to miking a string player. We use DPA microphones. They're not cheap, I must admit, but they are well worth an investment. When we got DPA microphones, it was a game changer for us, because it's a mic, it's not a pickup, it's an actual mic, and it keeps the instrument sounding like the instrument. And I know some churches have them, some churches will just use like a stand and just point a mic towards the direction of the violin, which that also works. So it reduces range of flexibility though, so if you're a player who likes to move around a little bit more, which in a setting, I do love the look of flexibility, and most string players also love flexibility. DPAs are $40.99, right? DPA $40.99 is what we have specifically, and those have been a game changer for us. Plus, as you said, pickups can tend to have a very thinner sound, almost tinny, where this, I feel like it's kind of the full meat of the sound of your instrument. But in the engineering aspect of things, you know, if you did want to include a young beginner instrumentalist, and to encourage them, to inspire them, and to, yeah, like I said, encourage them to be a part of using their gifts to lead others in worship, you know, you could always just not put a mic on them, have them up there joining everyone, but using the tips and tricks of engineering and amplification to where it's not necessarily distracting, even if they are having trouble with their pitch. And but at the same time, incorporating them and encouraging them along. And like, yes, the EQ of the cello, so that's, like I touched on just a moment ago, properly miking the instruments and enhancing those sounds that they want to give, and not putting the cello too high, allowing that bass to come out. For the violin as well, like allowing the full sound to be EQ'd properly to where it has its best worshipful experience and it's not annoying. The one other thing I would also say too is a lot of times when we've traveled, and it's to be expected because stringed instruments in any setting aren't as common in churches.
I feel like they're becoming more common, but a lot of people don't know how to mic an instrument. And a lot of times when we would traveling, people would put a mic on us, and you go listen out to the house mix. It's like barely existent because they think, oh, it's an acoustic instrument. We shouldn't really amplify it all that much. But if you do have a string player that knows what they're doing and you would like them to be heard, that's just one small tip that probably most of you know, but it's okay to push the level on those instruments more and allow them to kind of shine above.
Yeah, because I think, like you said, most contemporary engineers, contemporary sound engineers, have this preconceived idea. Sometimes we would follow a big worship song, so the band would be just jamming away on a song, and all of a sudden we would do something, and they would lower the volume. And we'd be like, no, it can actually be equal. Just because we're acoustic instruments doesn't mean we have to be a lot quieter than the electric guitar. So there's just a science and an art to that, to kind of keep levels at the same, even though, yeah, we are acoustic instruments. So then our final point is preparation makes for peace. And that goes for the leaders and musicians. And I know from our perspective and traveling around, it does make you feel valued when that worship pastor is prepared for you and is valuing what you're going to offer. And a couple of ways that we have enjoyed that from our experience is when they have our equipment ready for us, when they have water ready for us, when they have a music stand ready, even printing an extra set of music for us and having it ready, having a mic ready, a pre-planned place where they want you to sit. Those are all things that show that you've prepared and you care for what that person is going to offer in the worship service.
Really, no matter the age, because if you're dealing with a professional musician, let's be honest, a lot of classical musicians can be very snobby, I'm afraid to say. But so a lot of times they coming in would respect that very much to have that stuff. But even for your young musicians that you want to incorporate that don't know the music world, haven't had a lot of training, still those small steps to make them feel like their gifts that they're about to use are very important and they're valued. I remember just what that did for us too. It really, all those little bits and pieces come together, I think, to bring us to where we are today. And just the support that many of you and your people gave to us. I just remember all those little details of them making you feel like you were the musician, the wanted musician. And it's really encouraging.
In the classical world, there are a lot of politics that you do have to deal with, and a lot of that comes with orchestra seating placement. And everyone wants the closer to the conductor spots, and it's the coveted spots. Everyone's looking to see who gets them. And in the classical world, everything is assigned. It's audition based, and then you're told where to sit. So sure, there's a lot of politics, there's kind of a lot of jealousy that goes on, but at the same time, the conductor assigned you where you are, and you're not going to argue with it. And I think a lot of times in the Christian world, though, we don't do auditions. And so a lot of the times it's, free seat placement wherever you want to go. And as sad as it is, we see it all the time where the politics is still there, even in the church. And, the violinists are always like, oh, you're sitting closer to the conductor, or, oh, you're sitting on the outside, I'm sitting on the inside. And it's kind of, they don't say it out loud, but being in that classical world, it's like the air is really thick and you can cut it still.
And I think that's a perfect example of preparation lens for peace, because I think taking that extra time to assign seating if you're putting together like an orchestra event where you're using a symphony or involving all the members in your church to still put together an orchestra, assigning seating is invaluable. But even that is an art, because then a lot of people put all their good players in the front and the lesser ones kind of straggle more to the back or less experienced. And again, most of you probably know this, but the back is always the harder place to play anyway. So then once you put your more inexperienced in the back, it just kind of lessens their odds already. So the art of placing people intentionally, like some leaders in the front, but also some leaders in the back, that's what you see in the big symphonies, and that's super important in an orchestra setting. But I think we probably missed a couple of the different points that we wanted to make, but I think that covers the general of our experiences over the years. And we want y'all to have some time to get over to the next session or the exhibit. But do any of y'all have anything else to add as you think about some of the things that we've said?
Do you ever have like printed music or music that you do available?
Yeah, yes, ma'am, we actually do. Not all of our songs, but we do have PDF downloads on our website for some of them.
And the second thing is, I have some very strong strings for my classic service. We use a lot of Matt Riley.
Yes,
we love Matt Riley. He's amazing. He is amazing.
We have done quite a few of his arrangements. Most of them are very advanced, but solid. And what I appreciate about him too is that he puts so much time into every single one of his pieces. We've actually talked to him and asked him about contracting him to write some things for us, and he doesn't really do that. He does, but it's not like a Nashville writer where you can just contract them to just write anything for a flat fee. He takes hours and hours on every piece to where he doesn't really advertise himself as a contract writer. But that's what makes his stuff so good, because it's very, very thought through. Yeah, so if any of you have very advanced musicians in your church, I would say intermediate. He has some intermediate stuff as well. You're actually going to do one of the songs tomorrow, I think. But if any of you do have those in your church, Matt Riley is an invaluable source. I think his website's mattriley.com. Yeah, very good stuff. Any other thoughts or questions? Well, thank y'all so much for coming and listening to us chat. And it's kind of interesting, like when you speak on something, you end up learning a lot yourself. So this has been fun for us to put together, and I guess when it's your life too, and you do something a good bit, you take for granted the things that might be of help to others. Because so when we were at first going to speak on this, we're like, what do we say? Because it just seems so intuitive to us. But I hope it's been helpful to y'all. I know you know some of the stuff already, but maybe just fresh reminders. Yeah, for us, I think it just renewed our vision of, and as we heard this morning, Pastor speak about, it's like, what is worship? It's not necessarily incorporating every possible function that you have, whether great or small, but it's funneling that through the words of Christ, the theology, the doctrine that we want to portray in our worship, and then deciding if it needs that or not. And if not, then it shouldn't be, as hard as that is sometimes. It's not a talent show, but just glorifying the creator of talent. So thank y'all so much for coming, and we look forward to gleaning the rest of the conference with you all, and look forward to tomorrow as well. Thank you all.